Hi everyone, welcome to the latest and greatest episode of Failing Up. Today I'm sitting with Asher, the CEO of Hut 8. In this episode, we talk about the AI race, the future of energy infrastructure, as well as what it takes to become and maintain good leadership. Asher, I'm so excited that you're here. How's everything?
Things are great. Thank you for having me.
All right, are you ready to yap?
Let's do it. Let's yap away.
Okay, so you started your career in Shanghai.
Yeah.
Correct? So you started doing 2 ed tech startups. What made you passionate about ed tech to begin with? And how did that shift to energy?
Yeah. So going back a little bit, I went to college and my sophomore year, like after the second quarter, my advisor was like, you can graduate at the end of this year. I'm like, what are you talking about? I have 2.5 years left. And I'd gone to school with a bunch of APs and I had the scholarship. So I took a bunch of classes because it was cool and fun. And so I asked myself, I was like, do I stay another 2 years? I have the scholarship. And I was thinking of picking up either computer science or philosophy. And most of my learning at the time was outside of the classroom. I was doing finance competitions. So a ton of self kind of taught different organizations I was a part of. I had interned at a hedge fund. So doing a lot of these things. And I think my kind of takeaway was, I think I can learn more in the world. And the idea was this. My parents immigrated to the US. They wanted me to go to college, get a job, get like a nice paying 6-figure job out of school.
Doctor, lawyer,
exactly.
You know the drill.
That was a dream. And so when I had interned at this hedge fund, we did this analysis on this investment for 6 months. The company invested, the fund invested, the stock like popped, it went up like 3x. But I felt so empty inside. I was like, what actually happened in the world? Like, I haven't actually changed the world. I haven't done anything. Like, the fund made money, but that's not what I want to spend my life doing. So I had this like early stage like life crisis. I'm like, what do I actually want to do?
Early stage, like 19 years old?
Yes, 18?
Okay.
18,
okay.
17, 19, yeah, maybe sometime. So I came up with this idea and I'm like, look, I'm 2 years ahead of my friends. I want to go to Israel, China, India, Nigeria. And I'll go to each of these countries. And I went in research and I found like 10 CEOs that I thought were awesome and that I could learn from. And I told our dean, I'm like, look, I want to go and email all these CEOs and say, I'll come work for you for free. Just let me shadow. And at the end of it, I'll either have gained a really great perspective in the world and know where I want to spend my time, or I'll come back and I'm a senior with my friends and I graduate college as is. And that's kind of the path. And he's like, that's a great idea. I was like, are you sure? Like, my parents are going to kill you if like you're promoting this. They just want me to graduate and get a job. And he's like, your parents sacrificed for you to have an education to do opportunities like this. You can always go and get a normal job and have a white picketed fence in that journey. But like, this is why you're here. And so long story short, he helped me convince my parents to go on this like journey. I went to Israel for about 4 months, worked in Tel Aviv for 2 months, and 2 months in Jerusalem. Fascinating story of this company that had the management team were Hasidic Jews in Jerusalem, and their whole software team was Palestinians in Ramallah. And like, how do you build company culture through kind of such like diverse and kind of conflicting cultures and like all these macro political issues? And then when I went to China,
rewind. And what was the answer to that? How do you?
So it's, I think at the end of the day, this is where my kind of belief, like at the end of the day, all people are good, right? And their environment kind of shapes whatever actions and that they have. And I spent time in the office in Jerusalem, and I also spent time in Ramallah and went out and spent time with the office there. And I asked like the questions, I'm like, how do you guys work together? Like, if there's massive conflict geopolitically, like how do you guys still build a company and show up every day?
Yeah.
And the answer was, I mean, pretty beautiful. It was that like, whatever's happening on kind of a more political landscape, that doesn't affect how this person is and the person that I've been working with for X amount of years. And we come in and we work with the people that we work with in the company, and everything else is like the lives that we live in and the environments we live in, but it's not these people on the other side that are doing it. And so it was like they were able to put humanity first above all the noise of kind of everyday news cycles and so forth. And I think there was something like really beautiful there. And when I went, my dad's Israeli, my mom's Chinese. So I grew up in the US.
That's really
and so
amazing mix.
like going there, I think I had never been to Palestine my whole life. And so when I first went there, I was like, what am I expecting? What do I think? And you're going through and you're going from like Israeli soldiers to Palestinian soldiers. And you have this kind of like your heart beating. And I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. I was like, I really wanted to learn and go. And they were the nicest, most amazing people in the world. And I had the most amazing time when I was there. And so I think that maybe drove the education piece, which was like, people are naturally amazing and have so much potential. And how can like you create an environment where people fulfill like the greatest potential that they can have? And so I think when I went to China, one of my cousins had gone abroad to the US for school, and you have this huge kind of parents spend a ton of money for their kids to have a better education. A lot of them go out, leave the Gaokao system in China and try to go abroad. So you have kids going to the US, UK, Australia, everywhere. But college is pretty easy to know like what's a top school, what's an okay school, like what extracurriculars, what makes a school good and bad. Middle and high school is actually very difficult. You know, like the top boarding schools, but you don't know anything else. And there was a school that my cousin went to, and I think they didn't want to like bother us of asking us when we were in the US, and they just worked with some local company. And she went to the school, it was like the second story of a church, and it was 60 kids that are all getting charged like 40 grand tuition for like high school. And I went, and I swear when I was there, I sat in on their calc BC class, and I'm like, I can teach this class better than this teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And it just made me realize like it was such a shame that like parents were sacrificing so much for their kids to have a better education, and that wasn't happening. Mm-hmm. And the bigger so what actually was, when I went through school, I knew how to do well in school. That's different than like I knew how to learn and intrinsically had a passion for learning. And that only really happened to me in college. When in high school, like I was doing sports, I was in student government, I had straight A's because my deal with my parents was you have straight A's and you can do whatever you want and you can live your life, right? And so like I upheld my part of that bargain. And so when I actually found this sense of kind of like this innate love of learning and wanting to explore and learn new things. And for my own life, saying, okay, if I don't want to go into finance on the buy side, what the hell do I want to do with my life? And starting that journey, I realized that so many people in life, they kind of go through middle and high school, then they go to college because it's the next thing to do and everyone goes, and you say, like, if you ask a high school kid, why do you want to go to school? I want to get a better job. I want to learn. Like, it's all these like generic answers, but very
cog in the machine.
Exactly. Very few have like a deep rooted reason. And so they go through their college years, spend the first 2 years kind of messing around, enjoying college life, junior year getting this internship, and senior year you get this job. I think a lot of people hit their kind of mid-20s and like they realize they're not in love with their jobs, right? Some kind of go off and go to like MBAs or whatnot. But I don't know. I believe that if you don't love what you do and you only live once, like it's such a sad way to live life. And I feel like a lot of people find passion and happiness when they go home and they're like, work is work. I'm here to make money. And my passion, my life is like outside of work, but you're spending the majority of your hours working. And I know people that, I don't know, sell products on Amazon that make millions of dollars a year. Like you can make money doing anything. You just have to do it better than someone else. And you do it better than someone else by having more passion. And so the whole company I started in China was focused around, if I want to make an impact on the world, how cool it would be if I could leverage that and make an impact on the next generation of kids that could all have that mindset and go make an impact on the world. So that was kind of like the driver. And the thought was, if I can start working with kids in middle and high school and start challenging them on why they're doing the things that they're doing, instilling this like native true love of learning, then when they go into college, you have 4 years where the whole world wants to help you to succeed, and you can really capture that moment rather than kind of just go mess around and then graduate and go get a job. And so that was kind of the ethos behind the second business that evolved from the first, because I asked a lot of kids in the first business, we started doing well. And I'm like, why are you going abroad? Like, why are you doing it? No one could answer the why. And I'm like, okay, we just helped fix this process of kids finding better schools, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is like why people are in school in the first place. And so that was kind of the driver of education, kind of just fell into it.
So how'd you shift to energy?
So we had built out the business, started working with kids across, and the whole idea of why China for the second business, because I thought about should I start in the US, was there's such a big emphasis on like going to a good school and like just getting good grades and like this love of learning, this like natural inquisitive passion is like not very prioritized in their culture. And so I was like, if I can crack the nut here and the problem here on like doing it with Chinese parents that are very strict on their parents, we can expand this anywhere else in the world. Ultimately, this is kind of personal life, right? I met my now fiance now, and I had a real kind of question for myself, which is, am I going to be here and is this where I'm going to build a family and kind of build my roots? Or is it going to be back in the US where I was born and raised and all my friends are and all my family is? And so the answer was it was going to be in the US. And so I ultimately ended up running a process and sold that business. And when I came to the US, my co-founder in the company that ultimately now is Hut 8, him and I have known each other when I was maybe 17, him 18, 16 maybe. We met at a Peter Thiel like fellowship conference. And so both of us had been entrepreneurs our whole lives, and we made some money at disposable income. So we would work hard, go on a vacation somewhere, and we were like living a life that not many of our friends could live because they had to go into their job and and whatnot. And so we became really good and dear friends and have looked at opportunities to work together. But when I'm like doing something, I'm tunnel visioned. I don't do anything else. And those opportunities just didn't work. And so when I was selling the business, I called him. I'm like, hey, I know you've been always wanting to work together. I'm selling, moving back to the US. Are you still interested? And he actually flew out to Shanghai that next, I think it was 2 days later. And we sat in person, 1000%. And when we started a company called US Bitcoin Corp. And that ultimately ended up merging and becoming what is now Hut 8. And the kind of initial background behind it was he had built some of the first large-scale Bitcoin mining facilities and had Ethereum facilities early on as well that existed. He built a lot of the facilities at a lot of these public companies today, kind of the assets that they initially bought, both private and public, back in kind of 2017. And so he was like, you remember that business that I had in 2017 where I basically sold picks and shovels for the gold rush and built all these data centers and these machines for people? I was like, yeah. He's like, I think we could do it, but we can do it at an institutional scale because of the amount of institutional capital going into the sector. And this was 2020 when Bitcoin wasn't a thing still, right? 2018, the markets kind of crashed and didn't really come back till kind of 21. And then the second one is he's like, I think we can be great operators. He's like, look, you're an operator. Most companies who are in the space are here because they love Bitcoin, but this at the end of the day is an infrastructure operating business. And if you can be a great operator, that's how you win. And for me, I wasn't a huge Bitcoin crypto person. And actually, I pushed back at first. I'm like, I don't want to be known as a crypto bro. That's not I've come from a finance background. I've built an education company. I want to do things that are better for the world. Yeah. And I didn't know much about crypto. I spent much time, to be honest. And so when I dove deeper and deeper, I got more and more kind of bought it on two fronts. One is, I think, this idea of Bitcoin, store of value, digital value, and especially in places that you visit around the world. We talked about traveling before we just started here. Not all countries have the ability to believe in local currencies and inflation and so forth. And then secondly, one of the bigger drivers, which is why Hut 8 has been evolving so much since we've merged, is Bitcoin mining at the end of the day is really just an energy arbitrage. You're consuming large amounts of power and you're converting that into a form of compute. And in this case is Bitcoin compute. And so when I looked into kind of the energy sector, I thought it was really interesting because you had all these renewable projects being built. And at the time, wind, solar, ESG, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, it was so much money was being put into clean power, quote unquote. And a lot of that was in the form of kind of wind, solar. But where there's ample amounts of land, cheap land, where it's really sunny, a lot of wind. If you think about it, kind of West Texas, the Panhandle, and you have this whole wind belt, that's where a lot of the wind and solar is being built. The problem is there's not that many people there to consume the power. And transmission, think about transmission lines when you're driving down a highway. Transmission hasn't been built to actually transfer that power from generation to where the load is and where the consumption is. And so a lot of these assets actually ended up having negative pricing in those regions at the nodal price. And so these plants would produce, but because let's just say they got a tax credit where they can get up to 2 or 3 cents in tax credits, they could go negative 1, 2, or 3 cents because they could still make the delta on the tax production credit. Or there would be kind of curtailment where sites would shut down because they're saying it's too negative, like we can't produce. And I was like,
interesting.
It's shocking.
I didn't know that was happening.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, okay, that's shocking, is like, this is not sustainable. Like you can't go and subsidize this industry without a real commercial use case and the economics making sense. And so we're like, okay, Bitcoin data centers are essentially infinite batteries in the sense that they can shut down and they can consume power for as long as they need. And it's really price sensitivity. If you think about a traditional manufacturing facility or a mission critical data center, like you can't just shut down if power prices are high. That doesn't work, right? You have real employees that like need to continue making the product that they're making, or data centers that are running any critical loads or email browsers and so forth. And so that was the prompt of building the company. I was like, you know what? I think people are thinking about this business wrong. People are seeing it as a Bitcoin first company where it's really an energy first company and you have exposure into Bitcoin. And so that was kind of the origination story.
Yeah, because you said you want to view Hut 8 as an energy infrastructure company, not a hardware or a Bitcoin mining exclusive company, right?
Yeah, I think today people can say, oh, you're a Bitcoin company or you want to be a data center company. Like we don't want to be either.
So who are you trying to disrupt?
The problem that we're trying to solve in the kind of big vision is, as energy continues to advance, so too does its consumption of technology. As technology continues to advance, so too does its consumption of energy. And if you look at kind of historically, like we've exponentially consumed more and more power as society has progressed. And the World Bank came out with this like beautiful chart that like put this into a visual for me, which showed GDP per capita of countries and energy consumption per capita. And it's essentially a linear correlation, which is the more GDP per capita you have, the more energy that you're consuming. And so our belief is, the question is not how do we consume less power? If you want to continue to advance society, continue to advance humanity, continue to advance technology, the question is, how do you allow power to be consumed in a way that's sustainable? How do you allow it to be consumed in a way that's economical and that allows a grid to be fortified? And so for us as a business is, if we build a company at that intersection between technology and power, and we can go build new types of infrastructure. So Bitcoin mining at an industrial scale. When we started building multi-100 megawatt campuses wasn't really a thing. Right now it is. Data centers
Louisiana.
Today. Yeah, data centers
Congrats.
today. For data centers, you're building these massive data centers. In the past, couple megawatts, tens of megawatts was a big deal. Now we're talking about hundreds and gigawatts of power. And so power is increasing, and really understanding your consumption of the load profile versus actually the energy grids. What grids have the ability to bring on these customers? How do you structure in a way that is good for the actual normal people living in those regions, the ratepayers or the actual citizens? And so I think understanding the load dynamic of the technology, understanding the grid dynamics of transmission generation, and finding the best places those two come together, I think that's what we've done exceptionally well and will continue doing and kind of show the world. And that's our big vision. Today, we're building data centers to power Bitcoin compute. We're building data centers to power AI compute. Long term, like we may build hydrogen plants to power rockets being shot into the sky if SpaceX and Blue Origin are successful. And so I think the company is anything that consumes large amounts of power and is new and emerging technologies. How do we think about the infrastructure that's able to support them?
Okay. Amazing. Okay, so in China, leaders, I feel like today, recognize that an increase in energy consumption and an increase in economic activity, which that'll eventually translate into like geopolitical power. In the West, we were like that previously, but I feel like, especially with the previous administration, we shifted away from that more towards sustainability. How do you balance energy growth, but also sustainability? And is there a world where we can balance both?
I think we can, and I think it's being open to technological advancements, right? And so if we think, let's use renewables for wind and solar specifically, like, okay, you're building a lot of wind and solar in areas that don't have that much consumption. So then you should be spending a lot of money building transmission to take that power where it's generated to the area that's consumed. And in that interim, while generation is being built maybe faster than transmission, what are consumption of those of that power, right? And so if we think about kind of the last administration, I mean, there was a lot of negative press coming out there about Bitcoin mining is consuming power and it's hurting the grid.
And I feel like it was viewed as more energy equals bad.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And it's hard because the true answer is by understanding the details and the nuances. So I'll give you an example. If someone in New York City goes and shoots someone, are you going to say now every single person walking around is a murderer and you're going to go shoot people? So why I say that is because, yes, you might have one player and one bad actor who goes and builds a data center in a city and consumes the power and hurts the grid. But like large scale players like ourselves, we have to go to the places where we have the lowest cost of power. Usually the lowest cost of power means there's not that many people wanting that power because of supply and demand. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of our sites, for example, we have joint ventures with like large, like NextEra is a large energy company. We literally have a project, a 280 megawatt site at their wind farm because that wind farm wasn't getting the most economics and was having negative pricing and negative curtailment. And we built a Bitcoin mining wind farm data center at their wind farm. And so I think a lot of the times, like the large scale data centers that powered Bitcoin compute were actually net additive and net beneficial to the grid and help the economics of those projects that were there. You have kind of unique circumstances where maybe price went up and so forth, but that's not kind of the broad strokes because if price goes up, Bitcoin mining is not really viable anymore and they have to go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And so there's a natural economic driver. And so when I think about technology, I'm a massive believer in nuclear. And so as we think about nuclear, really like the problem with nuclear in the US is we grew up hearing about 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, and there's this like fear of nuclear. And if you think about, so Gen 2 power nuclear reactors, essentially you have like your uranium core is an active uranium core, and you basically create all of this protection to protect and to cool it. And so there's not a nuclear meltdown. And a lot of the new technology today, you actually have an inactive core, and when you turn up the facility, you're applying so much pressure, and you're actually creating it to be in an active state. So if something goes wrong and it shuts down, it's no longer active. And so, like for example, China, Russia, they're building more and more nuclear. In the U.S., like the last nuclear plant that was built, bankrupt companies along the way, right? And so I was actually, Mayo Shattuck, he was a CEO and chairman of Constellation Energy and Exelon, which owns some of the biggest nuclear sites. And I had one of his former kind of predecessors who took over when he had retired. And we were talking about nuclear, and I was kind of telling him, like, why don't we build? And he's like, the problem is there's so much regulation that people are signing up for essentially suicide if they're building because you don't know how much it's going to cost. You don't know what amount of kind of red tape there's going to be.
You have to jump
exactly. And so I think we have to, like, in order to build a more sustainable world, we have to embrace new technologies, but do so in a way that's safe and thoughtful.
So that leads to my next point, though. The current administration, Trump signed an executive order declaring a national energy emergency. Do you think we are in a national energy emergency? And do you think he's going about it well, like properly in the way of gutting all of these environmental protection acts? Because I think I feel like there's a middle ground we could meet here, and it goes from one end of the pendulum to the other end. And so I'm curious to know what you think about.
So I guess I'll start with the first one on like energy emergency. I mean, if we want to win in this AI race, like we need to build the largest AI facilities that can power compute. If other countries are building it, like we're going to get behind. I know we have kind of regulations around semiconductors and who can own these chips and so forth. But at the end of the day, like power is what is fueling these large models, and being able to be at the forefront of that is really important. And in any technologies, right? Even these large manufacturing, so TSMC, I mean, you're talking about massive multi-hundred megawatts and multi-gigawatt campuses to fuel these. And so we do need to develop and build more power generation. And you see that in the demand itself of like how much demand there is for net new generation across the whole US. So definitely need to continue. And it's a mindset shift as a country. Are we in a kind of protect mode, or are we in a growth
drill, baby, drill?
Can't be left behind mode, right? Yeah, for sure. Then I think the second is like change, to your point. Like change is never easy. I probably lean on the side of like being more of an entrepreneur and disrupting things. I mean, our company knows, like, I change up our company every like 6 months. I'm like, people can't be too like comfortable. Like I change up our org structure. I change up our seating in the office. I'm constantly changing things to keep people on their toes and focusing on building and not being too content with kind of the status quo. And I mean, look.
With that mentality though, how do you know if something's sticking or not if you don't give it enough time?
So it depends what you're changing, right? You have long-term initiatives that you set, but how do you actually keep people continue to be engaged? So even like our mining sites, we operate them really well. Can we do them better? So now, like in our town hall we just had earlier today, the head of our software engineering team, our data science team, was like, they're now starting to add in machine learning and AI into our algorithms that manage these machines to be able to optimize them even better. So like, there's always a way to do better. Like you can never be too content. And so I think like, look, when Elon first bought Twitter and like went through his change and the fire, and they're like, this thing's going to blow up, it's never going to work. And like, look, I think people are still using the platform and people in adoption has been higher. And so like, I think in times of change, not everything's going to be done perfectly. Yeah. But
I mean, he has the mentality of move fast and break things.
You move fast and break things. That's exactly right. And as long as you have the humility to say, look, I broke that was wrong. Let's fix it. I'm a believer in like we are in a race today in terms of technology and AI, and like we are barely scratching the surface of the capabilities of this technology. And I think the US needs to be at the forefront of that. And I think situations like the DeepSeek event a couple months ago,
I was literally had a question about it.
Many people realize that like
we're not as far ahead as we
exactly.
think we are.
That's right. We're not as far ahead.
Is there anything outside of us kind of opening ourselves to more innovation? Is there anything outside of that you think would help us win the AI race in the US?
I think it's a sense of, it's truly in my mind a sense of unity and wanting to like win at this race and build. And look at in the US today, like it's been really sad. You've had like such like beliefs in mindsets have shifted farther and farther, and they've been so separate. And I think we need unity in America, right? We need unity and nationalism around the country and wanting to go build something great, and not necessarily.
But why do you think that ever went away to begin with? Why would that go away to begin with?
Look, I think we've been very privileged as a country to be where we are, to have the economic prosperity, the technology, and the innovation. And I think like when you have a lot of things going well for you, you start thinking about, okay, how do I now go make impacts and help other people and do all these things? And then sometimes you do that and you realize that like people, like I think in the US, like I think people felt like, okay, we're trying to save everyone else, but I'm not living the American dream today, right? And I think that probably has created kind of these two different perspectives and worlds. Like as a country, should we be an inspiration for democracy and a leader and go and help? Like I think the answer is yes. But should we also focus on our own backyard and making sure that people are living not just great lives, but are they living in cities that are safe? Are they able to go to good education institutions? I think these are like the fundamental things of what makes a great city and what makes a great country. And I think because of that, like because of those two things not being aligned, we've had a lot of kind of divide, and we've become more radical in our thinking because you're either fully on the right, you're either fully on the left.
Like everyone forces you to align with one specific group of people.
Exactly. It becomes an identity of like, I am this or I believe this.
And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about working with people in Israel and people in Palestine.
That's right.
It's like you're way more than what those beliefs are. Yeah. Like you are your own individual person.
Exactly. And so I think like, I think as human beings, you'll always never agree with each other. Like we're just naturally, everyone will have their own beliefs. But if people can approach it with what is your perspective? Let me try to understand it. And even if I don't agree, here are iterations of what you're trying to do that can be done even better. I think that's how we solve it, right? And I hope kind of our political leaders will all kind of get aligned. Like, look, the election was a pretty big radical shift on all levels in terms of like the people speaking up and showing that they're unhappy. And so I think right now, rather than fighting for 4 years, like people should get united and say, okay, we might not agree. What are the things we can agree on? And let's go figure out how we can solve these things, right? And so, for example, if Elon's making all of these cuts, a lot of people are not going to agree with how it's being done. And so instead of just fighting and not creating progress, like, what is there a way to do it better? Is there a way to do it more sustainably, more thoughtfully? What are the critical pieces that need to be accounted for? And I think like that's because when you get into a mindset of it's us versus them, et cetera, there's no winning, right? It's just at that point, a lot of ego gets in the way. And I think everyone probably has...
it becomes vindictive.
That's right. Like, what are things people can agree upon? I think people living in America want America to be a great country that has prosperity for the people that live within the country. And if you are a citizen and you're here or you're abroad, you're protected because the passport that you have in the country has your back. Like, I think there are things that people can align on. So I think rather than focusing on the differences, maybe more time can be spent focusing on the similarities, and then that can allow people to talk about the differences more.
Yeah, I agree. Amen. Okay, so I wanted to dive in really quick because you are 30 years old. You are a CEO of a publicly traded company. I feel like that's a very impressive feat. And I imagine that you've dealt with your fair share of adversity, especially in 2022. We had Three Arrows Capital, FTX, Voyager, all those things. Yeah. A lot of your business relied on Bitcoin at the time. What were some of the most difficult decisions that you had to make during that time, and how did you navigate that?
So every year that since we started US Bitcoin Corp has essentially, so Stan O'Neill, who he was a CEO and chairman of Merrill Lynch, and he's become a great board member and mentor. And he told me, he's like, look, Asher, the one thing, like, I've met really smart people, I've met not so smart people, I've met like people from all walks of life. He's like, you're one of the most transparent people that I've ever met. And he's like, it's a great I take pride in it. He's like, you'll tell everyone how it is. You'll tell them the good, the bad, and ugly, and like, you won't hold anything back. And I think that kind of aligns with trying to like operate with high integrity and like, and trying to kind of keep that. And so I think for us, like, we've gone through a lot in a very short period of time. We started in 2020. We tried to raise money. No one wanted to hear anything about Bitcoin. So we were just like circling the wagons, and people were like, Bitcoin mining, no way. And I was like, no, it's an energy company. They thought it was even crazier. And then we raised some money end of 2020 going into 21. And 21 was a massive growth year, right? We grew. And when we started the company, I mean, spending like a couple $1,000s on legal was expensive, right? Mm-hmm. Today, I mean, I don't even want to tell you how much we spent on legal, but look, you pay for it one way or another is what I've learned. You either pay for it up front or you pay for it on the back end. You don't get the right counsel. And we're doing a lot of deals and super excited by that. So it's one of those problems, like, people complain about paying taxes. Like, if you're paying a lot of tax, that means you're doing something right. Like, you're paying a lot of tax because you're making a lot of money, right? So similar, if you're paying legal bills, hopefully it's because it's for growth and not for other things. But 2021 was a massive growth year. 2022 was really, really challenging for us because 22, Bitcoin essentially crashed, as you said, Three Arrows, FTX, Celsius, all of these things. A lot of Bitcoin mining companies went bankrupt. And then energy prices skyrocketed with the Russian-Ukraine war being like the initial catalyst. And so our revenues went down and our costs went up. And that's not a really good place to be in between. And for us, like, we had debt as well, and we had to go and restructure. And it was like one of the hardest times of my life because the idea of losing people money who invested in us, like, I couldn't fathom. It was like by far the worst 6 months of my life, trying to go through, renegotiate that debt, and ended up, turning, I think, a negative into a positive, because this goes back to like the intellectual curiosity. I was like, okay, we're like in a hard spot. We have to figure out how to, we got to figure out how to restructure this. We got to figure out how to save the company. Like, and look, I've had some of my best learnings. We're talking to like large institutions that everyone's heard of today. And I tell them about the story, and they're like, learning that, I think I was at 27, 28 at the time. And they're like, learning that at your age and having that with you today. Yeah. Is you
probably have an infinite wisdom unlocked.
Yeah. Like how we think like about raising capital, the downsides, like all those I've lived through, like these black swan events that could happen, that did happen. Right. And so, I mean, I think because it's just like this natural, like, hey, I want to learn. there was one company that went bankrupt and they owed us some money. And I told our team, I'm like, hey, I'm going to apply to be on the UCC committee, which is like the committee that oversees the bankruptcy, the unsecured creditors committee. And they're like, no, what are you talking about? We're so busy trying to figure out our own thing. Like, I'm like, look, worst case scenario, I go on, I learn something, I'm too busy, I step off, right? But like, it'll be interesting. I ended up chairing that committee. And
the bankruptcy committee for another company?
Yeah, exactly. And I started learning everything about bankruptcy, restructuring.
I love that.
We were negotiating our own. And then I went to our lawyers and I'm like, hey, I think I want to go buy these assets from this other bankruptcy. It's like, Asher, usually companies that are working through their own restructuring aren't going and buying other distressed assets. And I was like, we're either going to survive. And if we survive, I want us to be like very, very strong as a company, not average, or we're not. But like, we're not going to give up until our last breath. And so we were restructuring our own debt while we were buying assets in other bankruptcies. And look, I think going back to kind of the transparency, high integrity, we still were able to get people to invest in us, even knowing that we were going through restructuring because like we were able to structure in a way where their capital was protected.
Okay.
But two, I think they just like believed in us because even when we were going through the debt restructuring, I sat with our core investors and I told them, and I'm like, look, I'm going to do everything I can till my dying breath to figure this out. And I don't know. There were some moments like where I had teared up during that time, and my investor said, "We'll back you on the next thing. Don't be so hard." I'm like, what are you talking about? How could you say that? And it's like you've
given up already.
Yeah, and they're like, you've done everything in your power, and the world has changed, and you can't control everything. So, I mean, that made me work even harder. But we ended up buying a bunch of assets. We restructured all of our debt. We merged with Hut 8 around that same time. So I was working like 5 separate transactions at the same time. They all kind of came and hit all until early 23. Celsius went bankrupt. We were the plan sponsor. We took the assets out of bankruptcy as well. That's a whole nother story. A lot of learning in that experience as well with Ionic. Lots of learning on that experience.
Give me one, if you could give me like one big learning from that experience, what would it be?
So I met all of these creditors in the Celsius bankruptcy, and I had like a real deep desire because at a certain point, it was like, hey, we're spending so much time on this. Maybe it's not worth the time. And I'm like, all these people really got screwed. We think we can make this better. And then we spun out this company called Ionic. And I didn't care as much about governance, which was like board ownership, direction of company, and so forth. Because I was like, we have like a plan that can go create a ton of value and go make a lot of these creditors whole and make them a lot of money. And ultimately, like we ended up kind of losing control because I think there was different drivers and like, long story short, we're not involved in Ionic anymore.
Okay.
But that could have been such an amazing, amazing company if we would have just executed on the plan and the vision. Mm-hmm. And I think this goes back to the topic earlier, egos and this and that and getting in the way. But like, I hope they do well. I want them to do well because it's the creditors and I want them all to be super successful. But I think they would be a lot farther along if we stuck with the original plan spinning out and we didn't ask for as much governance and board as we thought. And so like now every deal we do, like I realize how important governance is and structuring that thoughtfully and appropriately. I think I continue to be a naive person and have the best hopes in people in the world. And my belief on governance was if you're doing the right thing, it shouldn't matter. That's not always the case.
Do you still believe that you should have that kind of naive?
Yeah, because I don't think you can go and change the world without being naive. Like I think any entrepreneur who knows what it takes to be an entrepreneur would never go and start a business. I think you have to be naively optimistic. It's like being an entrepreneur. People see all the great fun things like, oh, when I became CEO of Hut, it was like, oh, 29-year-old CEO, now 30 or so. I mean, when I took over Hut, we had a short report hit us. The stock was down like 50%. People lost confidence. We just did this merger and like all of these things happened. I mean, when we rang the NASDAQ bell, we had a short report come out like an hour later and the stock got plummeted. I was like, that is not the vision I had when I was a kid ringing the bell. And so like this year, like I think everyone wrote us off. And when I took over, they're like, this 29-year-old kid is taking over as the CEO of this publicly traded company in February of last year. And like, I mean, in the year, like, we went up to $30 from $6. We're back down at like 12, 13 now because Bitcoin has gone destroyed the last 5-6 weeks. And we increase our balance sheet. We have like over $1 billion of assets in terms of cash and Bitcoin. Institutional shareholdership went from like 11 to like over 55%. And so I think, I don't even know what question you were asking before I went on this tangent, but I think overall, like you learn along the way. And if you operate with high integrity, have good people around you and just like are relentless in trying to like do right by the people that do right by you, like things will work out. And we've been fortunate because we've had amazing partners along the way that like bet on us when we needed them to, and we wouldn't be here without them either. And so shout out to all those who may or may not listen to that. But it's been a fun journey.
Okay. And what makes a good leader, given that you've been through so many turbulent times yourself, what makes a good leader during turbulent times? Whether it's you that has done something great.
During turbulent times.
Yes.
Okay. Because I was going to say.
During turbulent
times.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I was going to say being a good leader, like what is a good leader changes in the different cycles of a company. And so like today, I'm reinventing who I am as a leader as well, because we're going through a much different growth stage of the company.
And how do you do that?
I think it's humility, right? Like today I could be like, oh, I'm a young CEO and I'm doing great and all these things and we just went public and I own all this equity. Or it's like, how do I become better? Like I had meetings with our board this year, went on my 1-year anniversary. And like, if you look at it from one step back, it's like, okay, the company has really transformed in this last year since you took over and all the benefits. And when I started the meeting, I was like, look, like we don't have to go over all the good things that happened last year. Like, let's just assume we all know what those are. Like, what can I do as a leader to level up again? Like, I want to go build $100+ billion company in a short term. Hopefully that goal becomes higher and higher. But I'm like, you guys have been a part of these Fortune 100 companies. Like, what do I need to do to level up to get to the next stage? Don't tell me all the good things we did. Like, what is the thing that I need to do to level up? So I think part of it is just like, I am building this company because it's like my passion. I love it. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be here. And so I think it's constantly trying to figure out how we can become better, going back to like the optimization earlier in the conversation that I brought up. And then how to be a good leader during turbulent times. I think when times are tough, your natural human tendency is to go in your shell, be reclusive, and hide until you try to figure it out. And I think getting ahead of it and being transparent and being open and being vulnerable is the best way to show like people that like you're truly trying to do what's right and do the right thing. So for us, like, it's in a couple layers. We're very, very open with our shareholders on what we were doing, what the plans were, what we were trying to do. We were very, very open with our board of directors and strategizing and doing things together. But I think even more important than those, with like our team, like aside from the management team, like the whole company, I remember this vividly because this is a time when like, look, most of our company, we have like low base salaries and we're very incentivized on equity. Right. And so people are like, okay, is there an equity to still sacrifice all these years? Like what is this equity? And we had a town hall and I told everybody, ask whatever questions you want. You can submit them anonymously and I'll answer all of them. And people asked some like pretty intense, ruthless questions. And our HR was like, hey, do you want to filter what you want to ask? I was like, no, we'll answer every single one.
Good for you.
And so we went through, and I think that moment, and I speak to like our team today, and they were telling us that moment is when people like double down with the company. I mean, I think one person we lost out of hundreds of people during that period of time. No one else left. Everyone stayed and hunkered down. And I mean, questions were as much as like, how could you have done this? Like, what does this mean for that? We literally answered every single question verbatim and went through. And I think like, if you just are transparent as a person, you let people make their own decisions of what they want. But I think and I'm also a big believer of like karma and things like that. And so I think when you kind of channel everyone's energy on supporting you all to figure this out, like you get through it.
I love that. I think that's great. Especially I feel like a lot of people have issues with leadership these days. It's just a lot of fluff. And they just want someone who's honest. Like give it to me straight. Don't tell me, one thing and do another. Just be honest. So,
I think a lot of leadership is like, oh, I can't tell everyone everything. I need it. Like, I don't get that. It's if people are in a company, they're sacrificing the opportunity cost of their careers to build and bet with you. And so like, you should treat them. I mean, our whole company has blackouts. Like some companies say only senior leadership can be blacked out from buying and selling stock. I asked the team a question. I was like, we can go two approaches. One is only kind of senior leadership can be blacked out. That means I can't be as transparent to you all when you ask questions, because if it's not public, I can't tell you if you're not blacked out in buying and selling our stock. Or we block everyone out during only open periods you can buy and sell stock, but I will be transparent. And the whole company was like, we're willing to not be blocked out in order to be transparent. And so again, I didn't even make that decision for them. I told them, what do you want?
And you gave them the autonomy to choose.
Correct. And then obviously not necessarily 100% of people, but we went with the majority. And then that's what we implemented as our policy.
Amazing. Okay. Well, my last question is, if you fast forward 50 years in your life, what will you have had to accomplish to feel fulfilled?
It's a really interesting question that I've been asking myself a lot. I'm a part of this organization called YPO, which is a lot of other kind of, it's a young presidents organization, but everyone kind of runs their companies. And I asked someone this, we actually had our retreat last week, and I asked someone this, and he's a little older than me, but similar age, has done exceptionally well. And has like done a lot of self exploration and self work to like, he's just like, he is happy with his life, right? And I was asking him, I'm like, if I had the wealth I had if 5 years ago you told me I'd have the wealth I had today, like that would have been my goal. Now I have all these other goals, right? And I'm like, when does it ever stop? You could always go and get a bigger house or go get a bigger, like people who are very wealthy and have these big yachts and these big planes. There's always, that guy has a bigger one. And there's never an end to that materialistic journey. And so we were talking about it. And look, I think today I'm very privileged and fortunate and lucky that I have an amazing life. I have everything I need to provide kind of what I need to my family and my loved ones. And I have this amazing privilege of like being able to provide a livelihood to a lot of people who work for us, who partner with us and so forth. And so to answer your question, I'm going to answer from two perspectives. One as Asher the human, and two as like Asher the CEO of Hut 8. I think Asher the human, like I have everything that I need today. And if I can continue to build a bigger business, but maintain a sense of humility, maintain a sense of transparency, high integrity, then like I'll be happy. And like I think I'm very fortunate because I love work. It's like my passion. It's what I love to do. And so if I can continue to do that, like I'll be happy. And like I'm already living my ideal dream and just continuing to do that. I think Asher as CEO of Hut 8, I want this business to be a business that can be a generational business that can be here for my grandkids and their grandkids, and be a company that people when they're going to college want to work for, and be a company that's making real impact in the energy kind of, whether you call it energy transmission, technology transition, like a company of size and substance. Today in our minds, we feel like $100 billion is like a real sizable company. I'm sure now we have $1 trillion companies, so that will continue to change and evolve as we grow. We thought $1 billion was a big deal when we started the company, and now our horizons have changed a lot. But I think just continuing the journey of building something we're very, very passionate about that solves real problems in the world.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have you.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.